Welcome to another TERF Talk Down Under. I'm Stassja and this is Ange. Hi, Ange.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Happy AGP Day.
You took the words out of my mouth. There's been a little bit of news around that. I saw someone posted Melbourne University have put bloody transgender flags on, like painted them on the ground at every single entrance to the campus.
Just the trans. Just the T of the acronym.
That's all right. Equality Tasmania did a media release that was essentially complaining about University of Tasmania they've refused to give trans people extra leave for their gender affirming surgeries.
They don't have them. Hardly any of them have the gender affirming surgery.
True. But University of Sydney has done it. So why isn't University of Tasmania doing it? Like they're demanding extra time. Like, you know, you think about people that lose their children and only have fucking 10 days of paid leave, stuff like that, you know?
And it's funny, we all know that university course fees are astronomical. A lot of the arts particularly have had their course fees doubled, right? But we've been in COVID for 2 years. So they're delivering online content, some of which is 10, 15, 20 years old via video, like watch this video and we mark you on it, right? So they've stripped universities bare. All the CEOs are still getting paid and they're wasting money on bullshit like this. Yeah. Absolute bullshit.
Yeah.
And it's this is why working class people can't get an education anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So for all their posturing about being fucking inclusive, excuse me, I'm not going to swear today, all their posturing about being inclusive, they're excluding everybody from being able to get an education by wasting money on this crap, this identity politics crap. I've got pop-ups. Now I've got big pop-ups. Sorry, guys, I'm having really, really big technical difficulties at the moment. I had 3 screens and I couldn't get on. But anyway.
Well done. You're on now. There's a new OzPath, the transgender peak body here in Australia, in honour of AGP Awareness Day, have released new informed consent standards of care.
Oh, okay.
I haven't read through it yet. I sort of skimmed a little bit of it, but we have an exciting guest coming on soon, and I think it's a he. Has probably read them, or at least he'll be aware. He can tell us a few things. So looking forward to that. What else? Oh, Anthony Albanese, leader of the opposition here in Australia, leader of the Labor Party, made a bit of a mistake. He was asked in a Daily Telegraph interview, can men have babies? And he said no.
If he sticks to his guns, I may be tempted to vote Labor like I usually do.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, it's donkey vote, because I won't vote for any party that erases women's sex-based rights.
Yep. I'm in an electorate where we have a new independent running, and she's a former ABC journalist.
Okay.
And I just emailed her this week and tried to suss it out. Where do you stand on, women's sex-based rights? And her response was, it's very complicated. You should come to one of these public meetings that I'm having and ask the question there.
Oh, that'd be cool.
I don't want to do it. I hate that. No. I hate confrontation.
See, that's where I would like to do it. See, I wouldn't mind that. I wouldn't mind a room of 200 people hating my guts. It wouldn't worry me. It's funny, but we each have our limits, don't we? With all of this stuff, we each have our limits, because you do so many things that I go, nah, couldn't do that. Couldn't write a letter to a government body that made any sense. But I can walk into a room full of my enemies and stand my ground. So, not that they should be my enemies. Another. Speaking of politicians, there was another politician that was in the news. A Melbourne City Councillor.
Has it made the news?
Well, it's made the social media news.
It sure has, yeah. Young chap, Rohan Leppert. He's a Melbourne City Councillor. He's got another 2 years in office. His crime, following J.K. Rowling on Twitter.
And it was only a crime because he represents and is a member of the Greens.
Yeah.
The Greens, who today on AGP Visibility Day have swamped all their social medias with AGP stuff. So he's a member of the Greens, and they are lobbying for all gender affirming like surgeries and stuff like that to be taxpayer funded. So he's stepped out of line according to them, and there's a sea of trans activists now harassing the Greens leadership to sack this young bloke. Now, he's gay, and in the short time he's been in politics, he has done so much for the entire LGBTQ plus community, including trans people, and all of that has been erased because they've got a slight sniff that he might be gender critical. And why wouldn't you be gender critical if you are same-sex attracted and this ideology declares your same-sex attraction a transphobic genital fetish? Why wouldn't you be gender critical?
Absolutely. So the response from the Greens has been that they've put together an open letter essentially denouncing him, even though they don't name him by name. And there was like a ridiculous claim in this letter that the Greens are getting a reputation for allowing these anti-transgender views to fester. It's like, are you serious? Like, the Greens, good grief, it's quite the opposite. I would have thought.
People laugh at them because they're so woke. They laugh and laugh at the Greens. Oh, that's funny.
So look, that's really exciting news for the Greens.
Because a lot of people are stepping up and standing up behind Rohan, as much as there's a lot of flack, but there's a lot of people in the Greens that are getting behind him and hope to support him through this, whatever happens.
Yeah, this could be, hopefully, the big split we've been waiting for, where, if the Greens actually start debating this amongst themselves, hopefully it gives hope to Labor, that Labor will start debating it, that Labor politicians will step up and say, hang on a sec, this is all a bit messy and has trashed women's rights, and why the hell are we castrating children, for God's sake?
Well, they're going to be watching what's happening in the UK. And they're going to be watching all the Leah Thomas stuff, and they're watching as society peaks. Now, all the media is still fully captured except the Conservatives, but there's something going on. We're not imagining it. I mean, we're a lot behind here in Australia. We have a lot fewer women and men who are prepared to stand up against this ideology, because people don't realise how far it's crept, because we didn't get an option to fight self-ID, and in the UK you did. And so it's a very different culture here, but people are waking up, and it's fantastic.
Yep. Fingers crossed. Gives me hope. Oh, it could even become an election issue.
Well, it is an election issue, because I'm hopping on all the politicians' pages and telling them that I won't vote for a party who doesn't support my sex-based rights, and I will continue to do that, and I hope other people do too. Just
Yeah, I've received a few fundraising emails from Labor Party members, and I've just responded with, I can't vote for you. You've trashed women's rights, and wake up.
And I asked them how they feel about all the men invading women-only services, and nobody can answer me. I've been busy doing that today on the Trans Visibility Day. I've been trying to get these politicians to tell me whether they approve or not of all the men that are invading, crisis services, and they just ignore me. And then I get a bit of Morrissey, even though he's not PC, I get a bit of Morrissey, the more you ignore me, the closer I get, and I just keep going. So, yeah, I don't like being ignored by politicians because I'm a taxpayer and I'm a voter, and, they're obliged to listen.
They're meant to be working for us.
Yeah.
All right. Well, our guest has arrived. I'm going to
Our guest. See, I've got a man ban on this channel because I said early on to Stassja that I wanted to avoid. He's listening, and you'll see his name and know why we've allowed him on here. Because I said early on when this channel started that, there's plenty of men that get a platform and a lot of women don't. And so I said to Stassja that because Bernard has worked so hard in this issue to raise awareness, that I would be more than happy to have him on our little show. So there you go. So we are finally having a man on our program.
Welcome,
Hi, Bernard.
How are you?
Hello, thanks for having me. Good,
Thanks for joining us. Now, did you?
Are we live already, or is this pre-record?
We're pre-recording.
Pre-recording, yeah.
Just, yeah.
Okay. So I was just telling Ange earlier, OzPath today have brought out informed consent standards of care. Did you see that?
Yes, I haven't had a chance to look at it yet.
Yeah, I just skimmed it. Yeah.
Yes, I'm interested in, at what age they start to be applied.
I wasn't paying attention to that bit. I just had a quick skim through. Informed consent, I would imagine, would be listing all the side effects of these drugs.
Well, I think that in the gender clinic world, informed consent has a very different meaning from the normal medico-legal meaning of informed consent. It's in fact a fast-track procedure with no requirement for a mental health assessment, and information is given about side effects and risks, but the whole emphasis is upon not gatekeeping access to treatment, not requiring a diagnosis. I don't know if the OzPath version, is consistent with that, but that informed consent model has been promoted in Australia by ACON in New South Wales and by Thorn Harbour in Victoria.
It's really concerning. Now, how long have you been following the transitioning of children issue?
Well, I kind of stumbled into it in 2019 after my editor asked me to have a look at a story to do with Barry Humphries being cancelled from the Melbourne Festival because he had made comments about medical transition, and there was, you probably remember, there was a campaign to get his name removed from the awards that were given, the Barry Awards at the festival. And so I wrote an article about that, and somehow then I became aware of the Jessica Yaniv case in Canada, which I think most people will remember. And then I got a tip from a contact at a university that there was going to be an attempt to deplatform an up-and-coming philosopher at a conference because of the paper that she was going to present. That turned out to be Holly Lawford-Smith. And so I descended more deeply into some of the issues, or really just started to. I was scratching the surface. And then I think I came across the writings of John Whitehall, Professor of Paediatrics at Western Sydney University. He'd written a number of articles in Quadrant magazine about the medical and ethical issues in transitioning of children, adolescents. And then I found some contacts elsewhere who I I think there were some contacts in Tasmania. They might have put me in touch with John Whitehall, actually, and with Diana Kenny, the former professor of psychology at University of Sydney.
Yeah.
And so all that was coming together in around the middle of 2019.
Mm. Yeah, right.
It's a slippery slope, because once you see it and you follow the links, all of a sudden you're down a rabbit hole. You're thinking, how did I not know this? Did you have that experience?
Yes.
Mm.
And I realised that I think I was vaguely aware that something like medical transition did happen with minors, but I had only the faintest idea about it. And I had a sense too that it was a difficult area that I probably shouldn't get too involved in. But yes, I think that's the reaction of a lot of people, is that once you have an understanding of what is happening, not just in Australia but internationally, I think it really gives you a feeling of being set apart from the mainstream, and I think the reason why I knew so little about it is really the failure of the media, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think the media has done a good job in this area. Of course, there were articles about the sort of celebratory articles from time to time about the medical procedures, but often with really no detail at all about what the medical procedures actually involve, what the evidence base is, what the risks are.
Yeah.
This is the thing. The Greens are lobbying for transgender surgery to be taxpayer funded under Medicare. And I've been asking
Yes.
Greens politicians whether that includes, mastectomies on 15-year-old girls, which we know is happening. What does this include? Because we know the minors are having surgical procedures. So, and these politicians, they won't answer me. So either they know or they're pretending that they don't know. I don't know.
Yes, well, there was a big, maybe it's still running, there was a big online petition to have all procedures of, so-called gender affirming care subsidised under Medicare. It's still a bit of grey area to me, exactly what is subsidised and what is not. It seems to vary. As for the Greens policy, I think they are in a bind, because if they seriously want to bring that about, they're going to need to be much more open about exactly what they're proposing.
Especially given, I just watched a couple of videos the other day about gender nullification surgery, which is like, for a male, it's removing everything so that you've got sort of the appearance of a Barbie doll. Like, is that going to be covered by Medicare?
Yes, well, it's interesting because, you'll remember that the term that used to be used was sex reassignment surgery. And then there was more talk about gender transition. But because that acknowledges openly the fact of a change being made, it might suggest that people are changing from something that was authentic to something that's inauthentic. And so we get the term gender affirming care, the idea being that gender at odds with biology was always there. It's not some new imposition, and therefore it's authentic. But how do you apply that terminology to, say, non-binary, natal females who identify as non-binary and want mastectomy, or, as you say, natal males seeking nullification? How can that be described as gender affirming?
And we're noticing too that it's mostly girls getting their breast removed, because the men seem to keep their penis. It is it's affecting mostly girls. And a man having a breast enhancement can be reversed. A woman having her breast removed can't really be reversed. So, It's just,
Yes,
it's just wrong.
I think it's probably also partly that so-called bottom surgery, or genital urinary surgery, is pretty complex and has very high rates of complications, and so it's mastectomy that tends to be done most often. But again, what's the rationale, the sort of philosophical rationale for a natal female who identifies as non-binary, either therefore neither male nor female, and yet wants mastectomy?
Yeah.
What was that gender affirming?
Yeah, it's so out there. The whole transgender movement, like the burden of it just falls on girls and women in so many ways, where not so much on men. Now you've started a new Substack recently. How's that going?
Oh, I think it's going well. It's an experiment, so I don't really know what to expect, but it's been going for a month now, and I've been quite busy because there's been so much happening. And the growth in subscribers, I think it takes a while. I got a rush initially, and then it slowed down a bit, but I think it's just a matter of continuing to report, and bit by bit people discover it. It's very interesting because I've been working in print media, newspapers, since before the invention of the internet. So it's a novel experience for me to be sitting there and having total autonomy in what I write, and so I have to try to be my own editor as well as reporter.
Yeah, surprisingly, if you look at my grammar, but I'm a writer by trade too. I did writing at university, and I had a few journalist jobs in country town newspapers and university magazines and things, where people paid me to see what Beryl up the road was up to. And I'm the same. I really struggle to just unfiltered write. If someone gives me direction and says, can you write on this, I go, yeah, sure. But to actually just sit there and have it all come out. Bernard, for a lot of people watching this channel won't know that you were actually not suspended, but you were under investigation last year. Was it last year or the year before? Could you explain that to our viewers?
Okay. There's a body called the Australian Press Council, which is a complaint handling body, and it handles complaints in relation to most of the big newspaper groups, including my newspaper, The Australian. And I've been at The Australian, 30 years or something. I had never had any dealings with the Australian Press Council until I started to write about trans topics and gender clinics, and so the complaints started to come in. One of the things I discovered quite early on in the reporting in 2019 was that the Press Council had put out a new guide for sensitive reporting on trans issues. And when I looked at that guide, it seemed to me to be an activist script. So I asked the Press Council how they had come up with this and who they'd talked to, because the Press Council was saying, at the time of the release of this guide, that they had committed 12 months of research and consultation in its development. And to my surprise, the Press Council refused to say which groups it had allowed to shape that guideline, and even cited privacy as the reason not to say. I still find that staggering. The Press Council, apart from handling complaints, it's a necessary function. It also is supposed to be a body that is upholding the values of a free press. And you would think that openness and transparency in the setting of standards would be essential. When I looked at that document, it did seem to me an activist script. It was encouraging journalists to use language policing guides from GLAAD in the US, the LGBT lobby, and ACON, the former AIDS Council of New South Wales. And the GLAD guide, for example, tells journalists that the very term biological sex is problematic.
Yeah.
So I wrote an article back in 2019 saying that here was this new guide. It didn't look balanced. It looked like an activist script. The Press Council wouldn't say who they'd spoken to. And I predicted that it would be used to smear journalists trying to write objectively in this area, and that it would make the task of reporting in this area even more difficult than it already was. And sure enough, you know, the complaints started to roll in. There was one sort of mega complaint from the director of a gender clinic. And in the end, I think there were 6 possible breaches of the standards. And the Press Council found that 3 of those breaches were not upheld. The complaint was not upheld in relation to 3 breaches, but in relation to 3 others, it was upheld. And that was the result of that. And I think that it dragged on for a long time. I'm trying to think when it finished, sometime last year. So I think that the process went from maybe late 2020 to mid to late 2021.
And this was the same director of the gender clinic that was doing a lot of media at the time and making claims that most of us had evidence to the contrary, and yet we were all silenced when we tried to say to the media, look, you know, what this lady is saying is possibly incorrect. And we're all no platform, blocked, whatever. I'm still blocked on the ABC's Facebook page for, you know, mentioning this gender clinic director. And so we're all being silenced and cancelled. And yet this woman has so much power. She can go to the Press Council and make a complaint about you, a journalist who's meant to be objectively covering this issue. It's, you know, the imbalance is so out of whack.
I don't have a problem with her making a complaint. You know, that's her right. My objection is really directed at the Press Council because, I mean, I should add something to that, which is that after I wrote about this trans reporting guideline and the council had refused to say who they consulted, I found that both ACON in New South Wales, which is in effect these days more of a trans rights group than anything else, and its Victorian counterpart, Thorn Harbour, had both publicly stated that they were consulted by the Press Council. So not only is the guideline on its face an activist and an unbalanced document that you can't really reconcile with the values of a free and open press, in my opinion, it's also the case that lobbies associated with the gender affirming clinic movement, if you like, were allowed to help shape this document in this secretive process. So I think the focus has to be squarely on the Press Council. Lobbies, of course, will always try to exert influence to the maximum. That's what lobbies do. But the Press Council's job is to look at the claims and assertions made by a lobby and test them against other groups and interests and come down with something that is principled.
Yeah.
But then that's just, sorry.
I was just going to ask, so is this, these guidelines, is that why here in Australia, like around the world, we're seeing these articles where they're reporting on, you know, women sexually assaulting another woman, and then it might only, sometimes the articles don't even mention the fact that it's a transgender woman, or they'll mention it like halfway through the article. Is that guideline influencing that?
Look, I don't know, and I think that it's a while since I've looked at it. I wouldn't be surprised if the guideline does encourage that practice, but I think that practice was present before this guideline. Right. You know, I think that I talked to the editor of one of the big online news services when they had done that. They had run a story which made it look as if a woman had engaged in a violent act. And the editor didn't seem to be able to grasp why some would find that objectionable.
Mm.
And I wonder if it's partly it's a generational issue, maybe, that these journalists and editors in their 20s and 30s have grown up with trans rights ideas as, just assumed to be neutral and balanced.
But then Victoria Police and important agencies that are upholding truth and justice and all sorts of things are doing the same thing, and they're an old school organisation. They're also the justice system, for example, which is not that younger age group as well. They're all affirming trans people's identities, their false identities.
Yes, that's right. And it's curious about the police, because you would think the police would be rather stuffy and archaic, but they seem to, maybe they're trying to compensate for that and be seen to be progressive.
They've signed up to ACON. That's the reason that they do it, is that they've signed up to ACON. And when I speak to grassroots cops, they're like disgusted, and it's actually hindering their policing, because at the moment it's so bad that police put missing persons things out, and someone identifies as trans and they do not mention that they are trans, and the person that you're looking at looks the opposite sex of the person that they are trying to identify. So you can't tell me that that's good policing, and you can't also tell me that that is not gaslighting and a very, very, very disturbing.
I think that this goes back a while. I mean, it'd be interesting to know how far back the ACON relationship goes. And I think the fact that ACON can get that sort of penetration of institutions is a symptom of changes in the culture. And I wonder to what degree it's actually driving them. Because, this is the case with various British police services, isn't it? And it's the case with, I think it's courts in British Columbia, where perhaps it was the senior judge, there was a practice direction that everyone in court would have to declare their pronouns. And they have these training documents for judges, including in Australia called bench books, which when you look at them, they're just pure queer theory, gender ideology. So it's true that these are institutions that not so long ago were seen as really hidebound and reactionary. I don't know why they have been so credulous and easy to capture.
What about the ABC? Can you shed? Are you in touch with any ABC journalists? Is there secret dissent behind the scenes? Do you know? Is there hope?
That's a tough one. I do. A number of my ABC mates are pretty much retired these days, but I think it is the case that I think there just have to be a number of people within the ABC who are very worried about self-identified trans. I mean, the ABC. I'm a bit puzzled, really, how it's come to this. The reporting, in my opinion, is so narrow and predictable. I'm really at a bit of a loss. I don't, I would have thought that there'd be, a pretty good share of gays and lesbians working for the ABC, and they must be aware of what's happening with, biological males identifying as female and declaring themselves lesbians and this sort of thing. I mean, the ABC staffers can't be oblivious to this, but there's no hint of it in the coverage that I've seen, at least. And the coverage of gender clinics, in my opinion, I've often used the term the coverage of showcasing, because that's really what it is. There's very little evidence of the journalists or producers involved applying any kind of scrutiny or skepticism about the claims that are being made. So it really looks like public relations promotion rather than journalism.
Yeah, propaganda. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, we've talked a lot about the world of journalism. What's happening in gender clinics around the world? What are the latest developments to be hopeful about?
Okay. Well, that's a striking thing, because there are actually quite a few international developments in the direction of caution, but I think they're hardly known in Australia because they're just not being reported. So, I mean, as you probably know, Sweden, I think it's only a couple of months ago now, the Swedish government, I think it's called the National Board of Health and Welfare, it has announced a very much more cautious policy, which means that the puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for minors are going to be very tightly restricted unless they're in research. There's some wriggle room in relation to exceptional cases, but still, you know, that's quite a comprehensive document that's been released. It follows a apparently very comprehensive review of all the medical literature by an independent Swedish agency. It clearly has had some influence on the French, because quite recently the French National Academy of Medicine issued a press release expressing concern about the epidemic-like spread of young people diagnosed with gender dysphoria. They cite Lisa Littman's paper that this may be a form of social contagion, and the French Academy is warning parents to be vigilant for internet addiction, as they put it. So that's quite significant too. I mean, that body has a moral influence rather than a legal influence, and there's a fair bit else going on within the French government which is much more accommodating to gender clinics. The French don't seem to have the massive numbers of teenagers in the gender clinics such as are found in the US or Canada, and the numbers in Australia are pretty significant per capita as well. And then of course you have the really big clinic in London, the Tavistock Clinic. I think you probably know that a couple of years ago, Finland may have been, perhaps it was the first public health sector to decide that the medical treatments, the puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones, would no longer be the sort of first line of treatment, and there would be much more attention to psychotherapy and traditional psychiatric assessment of the multiple other issues and problems that these kids have. So you've got Finland, Sweden, France, in the UK, the NHS, I think around 2020, quietly edited the very confident claims they were making about the reversible nature of puberty blockers on the gender clinic website. So that was, there was a bit of stealth editing there to reflect the view that the long-term psychological cognitive effects are just unknown. And also these medical treatments trace back to the Amsterdam clinic, hence the expression, the Dutch protocol for this sequence of treatments from puberty blockers through cross-sex hormones to surgery. And two of the clinicians in the Amsterdam clinic have gone on the record to say that they are worried that the patients that are now being seen in gender clinics, mostly natal females with adolescent onset gender dysphoria, that's a very different patient group from the patient groups that the Dutch clinicians were dealing with and on which they based the Dutch protocol. their patient group being overwhelmingly natal males with gender dysphoria persisting since early childhood. So there's multiple points of concern around the world in relation to gender clinics, but they're not really being reported or picked up in the really, in mainstream media with a big reach. Probably the best media coverage, I think, is in the UK, because we have The Economist, The Observer, The Times, the BBC, also Sky News and the Daily Mail. They are all giving pretty good. It's balanced, but it's factual and sceptical of claims that deserve skepticism.
Absolutely. I think in Sweden as well that trans train investigative journalists, they've done like three what do you call it, videos on it now.
Yes.
That made a huge difference, I think, over there. Yeah.
Yes, I think it did. It's the timing is interesting because there was a decline in new referrals in the main clinic in Stockholm, but I think that decline actually started a bit before the first trans train doco. I mean, before the trans train doco, there were a number of articles in the Swedish press, and one of them was written by Christopher Gillberg, who's a really internationally famous researcher, an expert in neurodevelopment, autism, ADHD, etc. And so he and some other psychiatrists had written articles in Swedish newspapers, I think, before the trans train got going. So they've had, I think that's been a benefit, that has guided the debate. But the trans train documentaries, I think, have had, a big international influence. They're available with English subtitles, and those are made by the flagship investigative journalism program for the Swedish public broadcaster. So, if you like, it's the parallel to the ABC Four Corners. But ABC Four Corners in Australia, as we were saying before, has, in my opinion, uncritically showcased gender clinic treatments, has not done investigative journalism at all. And the other parallel is the BBC Newsnight. Again, it's the flagship investigative journalism program of a public broadcaster. And BBC Newsnight has done, detailed and difficult investigative journalism over a period of years on the Tavistock Clinic.
Yeah.
So we in Australia just don't have that.
Not yet.
No.
It might fall to 60 minutes.
Oh. So why is there such a capture? Is it lucrative to the struggling public health system to fast track these kids onto a lifetime of, medical care? Like, what is it? It's, there's all these theories out there what's behind this, but when self-identification and the affirmation thing first came in here in Victoria, there was no consultation with the public. There was no consultation with any other interested groups except for the Royal Children's Hospital and possibly one of the ACONs or equivalent. There was nobody else had any influence into these two things. How did that happen? Why? Surely there's a reason. It must be financial. Like, are they donating to political parties? Like, how? I don't get it.
Yeah. In North America, they always say follow the money, particularly in the United States. And so, and I think the United States is a much more money-driven society in some ways. But in Australia and in the UK, and I assume it's probably like this in New Zealand and maybe to some extent in Canada, the gender clinic stuff is being driven by the public sector. And the people who are driving it are not on especially big salaries, and they're not, I wouldn't say they're in it for personal gain. I think that they are mostly true believers
Wow.
And it's the nature of the ideas. So it's a worldview in which they see themselves as the champions of the most marginalised, the most vulnerable community ever, and surrounded and besieged by bigoted enemies. And the gender clinics have this wondrous medical treatment which will save the lives of these kids. And as you know, the suicide claims are absolutely central to this. So it becomes easier to claim that words of disagreement, let alone full-on debate, are simply too dangerous. And that fits into a bigger shift in the culture, which is not specific to trans. Some people have called it safetyism, and it's this ultra sensitivity to offence, to disagreement, to the wrong words. And I think you put all those things together, and that's the reason for it.
Wow. It defies common sense, doesn't it? It just defies any common sense. I just can't comprehend that someone could just be so unwilling to listen to any rational argument.
Well, so much of human history is irrational, isn't it?
True.
Well, look, it's been a pleasure talking with you, Bernard. Thanks so much for coming on. We're going to have to wrap it up, but I'll put links to your Substack down below, and you just had an excellent article published in Quillette as well. I'll link to that as well for all our subscribers. So
yeah, and thank you so much for everything you do, Bernard. Like, you're a bit of a hero among the gender critical crowd, because you're one of the few that's willing to put themselves out there. So yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and you're the probably going to be the only man we have on this show, because we're so grateful that for everything that you've done. We're giving us a voice, giving everyone who has no voice, you give us a voice. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks, Stassja.
thanks, Bernard. See you next time.
Yeah.
Just get you to click the leave button. Thank you.
Cool. What a good dude.
Yeah.
And that's what my bookcase looks like too. Every writer has got a thing full of books, and they don't read them. They're just there, and wow. Gee, we have some good guests.
Now, this sort of relates to some of what Bernard's talking about. We didn't get into the grooming of children that's going on in schools. But this article just came out today. Disney embraces queer agenda in new LGBT-friendly look. So what's happened is, well, they're dropping the term ladies and gentlemen to avoid offending transgender children. There's been some videos leaked online, and here's what's said in one of them. This is Carrie Burke, who is president of Disney's General Entertainment Content. I'm here as a mother of 2 queer children, actually 1 transgender child and 1 pansexual child.
How does a kid have a sexuality?
I hate to think, how old are these kids, and how the fuck do they know what pansexual is, for crying out loud? I don't even know what pansexual is.
Pansexuals don't know what pansexual is. Because they're groomed. These kids are groomed by their parents, putting these bullshit ideas in their heads.
Yeah, absolutely. So what they're doing is they're planning to make half of their characters either a racial minority or LGBT by the end of this year. So if you've got a Disney account,
then, well, I went past a billboard for that foul Pam and Tommy thing that Disney produced. So
goodness.
they produce that. And so on the bottom of that Pam and Tommy thing, which is the story of how Pamela Anderson's sex tape got released to the public, and she actually came out and said, I don't want that dragged up 30 years later. I do not approve of this biopic that you're doing, Netflix, and I don't want any part of it, right? And Disney produced that. So I've been seeing this disgusting, traumatizing thing that's happened to this woman.
Yeah.
On all these billboards, like, look at, and you know what's going to happen. All the creeps are going to go on to porn sites and look at the video again, re-traumatizing Pam, right? And there's a little Disney logo, which I associate with being so vanilla and boring. And even when I was a kid, it was too cheesy for me, Yeah. And there's this wholesome thing. One of the last of the wholesome things was Disney.
Yeah.
And now it's porn. Gender bullshit, because they go together. They always go together. Yeah. It's just insane. My kids don't watch Disney anyway, but it's just awful how bad this stuff's crept in and how they're grooming younger and younger kids.
I think Bernard's really onto something with what he was saying about these people pushing this. They really think that they're being champions of this marginalized group.
Really? How can anyone think a 65-year-old man or someone like freaking Richard Pusey in midlife trying to go into a women's jail because he's been done for indecent exposure and he's going to jail. So now he identifies as trans and he wants to go to a women's jail, right? How can anyone think these pricks are marginalised? White, middle-aged, middle class. Pusey drives a Porsche, for fuck's sake. He's not marginalised.
Yeah.
Oh, it makes me sick.
I think they're thinking of the trans children. I think
trans children.
And
then children I know are all middle class white kids.
Yeah.
And I know probably 1, 2, 4.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that there is an element of what Bernard was saying, but then I think then around them are people who are doing that thing where they're like, oh, this doesn't feel right, but I don't know enough about the issues, so I'm going to listen to the experts who are these trans people, and I'm just going to go along with what they're saying, even if it makes me uncomfortable. That's
parents, because the parents that I know who've trans their kids, they weren't true believers, and they were told that if they don't embrace this 100% and affirm their child, then their child will kill themselves. And it's like this freaking veil's come over them. All of a sudden, they're calling me a TERF. Like, they've gone from like, I don't want this to happen, I can't have this. As soon as they hand their child to the system, and there is only the system, there's no, unless you've got truckloads of money, private psychologists for your dysphoric child are rare as hen teeth and really expensive. So GPs on first visit are referring to gender clinics because GPs don't want to get in trouble for, conversion therapy. And the gender clinic is affirmation only. And at the first visit, the parents are taken away from the child and said, your child is blah, 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 blah. And if you don't do this, 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 and this, your child will die.
Yep.
And that's when they become the true believer.
Yeah, right. It's all such a mess. I just realised I forgot to, I should have done it at the start because they probably won't be watching now here at the end, but I wanted to welcome the trans activists that have found our channel last week.
Yeah. They finally found us because we're coming up. This channel is coming up in their searches, and this some poor trans man hopped on in the comments and goes, "Oh, why is YouTube sending me this TERF stuff? I'm a trans man." Oh no! Yeah, they're coming in, making all the usual comments about the way we look and how we're horrible bigots and we're Nazis and all this stuff. But yeah, so welcome.
Here, I'll just read this one out. The way these miserable individuals laughed at that person's name, that person being Roxy fucking Tickle.
I watched the whole video. Yes.
And also at their own cliche description of women was so obnoxious. Another one that had a big rant. It was like, 2 paragraphs, essay length almost. And in that, she or he has called us evil, used the word evil to describe us, Ange. We're going to hell.
Awesome. All my friends will be there. See, I love this stuff. Like, because it's just, to me, it's just so absurd. Like,
Yeah.
it is just so absurd. And the true believers, like, they're dangerous. They're dangerous people. This whole ideology is dangerous.
Absolutely.
I actually think there's something more sinister. When it comes to the gender clinics, there is something going on. There's money, there's something. It can't just be beliefs, because we've had people inside those agencies saying, I don't agree with what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So people working there are getting peaked by just working there. So I think there's something else, but we'll wait and see. The problem is that, yeah, we know there are detransitioners, and they're detransitioners here in Australia, but it costs at least $15,000 to get your first medical negligence case up. $15,000 in legal fees to get a medical negligence case up. What detransition person with poor mental health, and we know that kids in state care are overrepresented in the trans kids. What kid who's just destroyed their entire life and, you know, come out of this stupor of realizing they're not trans, mentally, physically, and financially, they can't afford to fight back. They can't afford to take these clinics to account. They just can't. And this is the frustration we have. It's going to take someone like Kira Bell, where people are going to crowdfund and support them, but who would have the energy? You know, it's going to be 10, 15 years from now where we're probably women rebuild themselves and get strong enough to actually take on the system. And this is the frustrating thing, just waiting for these things to happen. Like, we've got, you know, human rights things coming up where, you know, we might have an opportunity to see how far our sex-based rights are protected compared to gender identity, like with Sal's case. There's a few things coming up where we're testing the waters legally, but until the detransitioners start coming forward and the desisters and talking openly about what happened to them, and I don't blame them for not doing it, you know, there is this thing that every trans person goes off to some, you know, wonderful, happy place. And all the suicides down the track when these people wake up and realize what they've done to themselves. And that's when they suicide 7 years in. All the suicides are brushed over. It was the transphobia because they were never accepted. No, it was because they never accepted themselves and they're trapped.
Yeah.
You know.
Just on the legal test cases that are happening, I forgot to mention last week, Jessica Hoyle had a second hearing or something like that. I don't know all the legal jargon, sorry lawyers, but something like that, a second hearing, and it got adjourned again because there's another sort of test case going on in Tasmania at the moment, which is to do with the fact that biological sex is no longer a protected characteristic under Tasmania's anti-discrimination legislation, which puts it at odds with the Federal Sex Discrimination Act. So at the moment, Tasmania, I don't know if you could say they're operating illegally, but you know, they're definitely in conflict with the federal legislation. So Jessica's case is on hold for the moment until this other case gets sorted out, which I haven't looked into, and it's got nothing to do with gender identity or anything like that. Yeah.
So what's stopping, you know, Labor getting in the federal election and then removing it from the federal thing? You know, what's stopping them doing that?
Yeah.
I mean, did they actually remove it? Like they just scrub that out and nothing else?
It's not in the legislation. I don't know when.
Gender identity doesn't exist. It's not a tangible thing.
Yep.
Sex is tangible. Gender identity is intangible. How can you protect people against each other, like say in situations of domestic violence, you know, where there's a clear male-female protagonist?
Sexual harassment at work.
Sexual harassment, yeah, you know, and this is funny. The Grace Tames and Brittany Higgins and the Clementine Fords and the Vans and all the feminists, why aren't they screaming about this?
Yeah.
Oh, because we don't want to offend all the you know, white middle-class men. Oh.
Oh, crazy days. A couple of.
I always say I'm not going to rant. I always say, oh no, I'm going to be real. You know, I'm going to be professional, and I'm not going to rant, and I'm not going to laugh at people. I'm gonna be try and be a proper journalist.
Newsreader.
I fail every time. I fail.
Just a couple last things. I was really heartened to find out there's a little gender critical radfem cell operating up in Canberra. They've popped up on Twitter. I'll find a link. Women's Action Group Canberra, I think they're
nice.
called. So that's cool. And on a sad note, there is a male trying out for the Women's National Rugby League.
I saw that.
He's being considered. He's made an application and they're considering it.
They didn't show his photo because I bet you he's built like a brick shit house, because rugby players that get to the elite level and they're men, they've got they're built like bears. They're massive. They're absolutely massive. And there's no way one of them should be playing on the women's team. No way. And even if he's a small man, he's still a strong man. No. And, who are they consulting? When, they're consulting among themselves, but who are they genuinely consulting?
I mean, considering World Rugby said, no, this is really dangerous.
It's probably Hannah. It's probably Callum Mounsey. He's probably going around to all the different sports, knocking on the door. Let me in. Bloody Callum.
All right. On that note.
Oh, AGP Awareness Day, and I bring up Callum. Who else we got? No.
All right. I think that's everything for now. Oh, wait, there's a women's Cooee to ABC are doing a public protest up in Sydney. I'll put a link. If you're in Sydney, get in touch.
I'm thinking of going to that. Because I've got a kid-free weekend and I've got a new old car and I feel like going on a road trip. So you might just see me there. So come along.
Awesome. All right. Thanks to all our subscribers and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks to the trans fans.